Okay. So have you ever had to, like, forgive someone
Mm-hmm.
who really messed up, like really messed up?
Yeah.
Or maybe you were the one who needed forgiveness.
Right.
And it's a tough situation to be in either way.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's what we're diving into today.
Okay.
We're looking at the Book of Philemon,
Okay.
which is this short but super powerful letter in the Bible that deals with these exact questions of forgiveness and redemption,
Right.
second chances. But it's set against this backdrop that might surprise you a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not what you would expect, right? It's not like this abstract theological, treatise or whatever.
Right.
It's a real letter dealing with a real messy situation. So we have this runaway slave, Onesimus,
Okay.
who wronged his master, Philemon.
Right.
And then while he was on the run, he finds faith.
Oh, wow.
And now the Apostle Paul is sending him back
Back to the master.
with this letter asking Philemon to forgive him.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
That has got to be like the most nerve-wracking homecoming in history.
You would think.
Talk about awkward.
Oh, yeah.
But to really understand this situation, we need to remember what it meant to be a slave back then.
Yes, absolutely. So, in the Roman Empire, slavery wasn't some fringe system. It was like the backbone of their society.
Is how things worked.
It was how everything worked, yeah.
Yeah.
And Philemon had complete legal authority.
Right.
Over Onesimus, he could do pretty much whatever he wanted.
Wow.
As punishment. And we're not talking about, a slap on the wrist here.
Right.
This could be life-altering stuff.
So Paul's not just asking Philemon to, overlook a minor offense here.
No.
He's challenging the entire system.
He's challenging the very foundation of their social order.
Wow.
And it's even more radical than that, because he doesn't just ask for forgiveness.
Right.
He basically demands it.
He's like, you will do this.
Yeah. And then he goes a step further.
Okay.
He wants Philemon to welcome Onesimus back. Okay.
Not as a slave under his control,
Right.
but as a brother in Christ, like an equal in the eyes of God.
Oh, wow. So how would that even work in their society?
Right.
It seems impossible.
It seems impossible.
Yeah, that's kind of the point.
Okay.
But that's the power of the gospel, right?
Yeah.
He's showing that the love and forgiveness offered by Christ completely transcends the social norms and power structures of the world.
Right.
It just blows everything up.
Flips it on its head.
Completely.
And Paul doesn't just talk the talk, he walks the walk.
Oh, he does.
He puts his money where his mouth is, right?
Literally.
Yeah.
He tells Philemon, if Onesimus owes you anything, charge it to me.
Yeah, put it on my tab.
He's willing to cover the cost.
He's willing to bear the financial burden of forgiveness.
Wow.
Which, it shows you that true forgiveness isn't cheap.
Yeah.
It often comes at a cost, sometimes a very real, tangible cost.
Yeah.
Paul embodies that in this letter.
He really does. He's not just saying, hey, Philemon, you should have a change of heart. Right. He's saying, I'm going to back that up with action.
Exactly.
I'm going to show you what I mean.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, how we handle these situations.
How often do we hold a grudge?
Yeah.
We demand payment for, the wrongs we've suffered.
Right. It seems like it's human nature, but what's the alternative?
Yeah, what is the alternative to that?
Well, I think the alternative is what Paul models.
Okay.
This radical forgiveness that releases not only the person who wronged you,
right,
but also yourself.
So you're saying holding on to that bitterness and resentment doesn't actually change the past.
No, it does.
It just keeps you stuck there.
It keeps you trapped. It poisons you.
And so forgiveness in the end is about choosing freedom.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think it's so interesting that the name Onesimus actually means useful.
Yeah.
And before running away, he was kind of useless to Philemon, right?
Right. He wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing.
Wasn't contributing.
But now he's useful to both Philemon and to God.
Right.
So what's the significance of that name?
Well, I think it ties into this idea of redemption.
Okay.
That God can take our brokenness, our mistakes,
right,
even our, deliberate wrongdoings, and transform them into something beautiful and purposeful.
So we see that in Onesimus.
Yes.
But it also applies to all of us.
Absolutely. We all have that potential to change and to grow and to become useful.
To become useful in God's kingdom.
In God's kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not just about forgiving Onesimus then.
Right.
It's about recognizing that potential for redemption in all of us.
Even when we mess up.
Yeah, even when we make mistakes.
Even when we really screw things up.
That's powerful.
It is.
So if God can offer that kind of forgiveness and redemption, who are we to withhold it from others?
From others, or even from ourselves.
Oh, and that leads us to a question that hits a little closer to home.
Yeah.
How does this idea of radical forgiveness,
Right.
releasing the bitterness, embracing redemption,
how does that play out in our everyday lives?
And I think that's what we should explore next. So we've been talking about this radical forgiveness that Paul's talking about in Philemon.
Right.
But how do we actually live that out?
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to talk about it in theory, but
yeah, it's messy.
Real life is messy.
Real life is messy.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is not like some magic formula.
Right.
You know, you just apply it and poof, everything's better.
Yeah.
It's a process.
It's a journey.
It is, and it can be a really difficult one.
Right.
It requires like a deep level of honesty with yourself, first of all.
Okay.
You know, like acknowledging the hurt that you've experienced and the anger and resentment you might be holding on to.
Yeah, and I think we get tripped up sometimes thinking that forgiving someone means that what they did was okay.
Right.
Or that we're letting them off the hook.
Yeah, that's a really common misconception.
Yeah.
Forgiveness doesn't condone the wrong. It's not about minimizing or excusing the hurt that was caused. It's about choosing to release the bitterness and resentment that's poisoning you.
So it's like cutting the cord.
Exactly.
Not pretending it didn't happen, but you're also not letting it have control over you anymore.
You're not letting it define you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're recognizing that holding on to that anger and resentment only hurts you.
Right.
In the long run.
It doesn't actually change what happened.
It doesn't. It keeps you trapped in the past.
And she's stuck.
Prevents you from moving forward.
Yeah.
And it can even impact your physical and mental health.
Wow.
Like it can actually make you sick.
So it's like carrying around this heavy weight.
Yeah.
And forgiveness is the act of putting it down.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's important to remember that forgiveness doesn't mean you have to reconcile with the person who wronged you, especially if it's not safe or healthy to do so. It's about finding peace within yourself, regardless of their actions or responses.
So how do we actually start that process? Where do we even begin when we feel like we're drowning in hurt and anger?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
Well, I think it often starts with just acknowledging the pain you're feeling.
Yeah.
Allowing yourself to grieve the wrong that was done.
Don't try to push it away.
Don't try to suppress those emotions. Let yourself feel them, process them.
Okay.
Sometimes journaling can be helpful for that.
Okay.
Or talking to a trusted friend or therapist.
So you're not denying the reality of what happened. You're facing it head on.
You're leaning into it.
Okay.
And then it's about making a conscious choice to let go of the bitterness.
Okay. How do you do that?
Well, it might involve praying for the person who hurt you.
Even if you don't want to?
Even if you don't feel like it.
Okay.
It might mean actively choosing to focus on the positive aspects of your life.
Right.
Instead of dwelling on the past.
And I imagine it's not like a one-time thing.
No.
It's something we probably have to choose over and over again.
It is. It's a daily decision to release the hurt and choose peace. And sometimes, you know, it's a decision we have to make multiple times a day.
Really?
Yeah.
And what about forgiving ourselves?
Ooh, that's a good one.
That seems so much harder.
Yeah. Sometimes that can be the hardest forgiveness of all.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, I think we tend to be our own harshest critics.
Right.
You know, we hold on to those past mistakes. We beat ourselves up for things we can't change.
We have that inner voice that just loves to remind us of our failures.
And it's brutal.
It is brutal.
And I think it's often rooted in shame.
Okay.
And this belief that we're not worthy of love or forgiveness.
Like we don't deserve it?
Yeah. And that's where God's grace comes in.
Okay.
It reminds us that we are loved and forgiven.
Yeah.
Not because of what we've done, but because of who we are.
Okay.
Beloved children of God.
So it's about shifting our focus from our failures to that unconditional love and acceptance
that God offers.
Yeah.
And that's hard.
It is. It's about accepting ourselves' flaws.
Yeah.
And embracing that truth.
Yeah.
That we are worthy of forgiveness even from ourselves.
It sounds simple.
It does.
But I'm sure it takes a lot of work to actually live that out.
It does.
Yeah.
But it's so worth it.
Yep.
When we truly forgive ourselves. It's like this incredible weight is lifted off our shoulders.
Yeah.
We can finally breathe freely and embrace the fullness of life that God intends for us.
So this idea of forgiveness, whether it's forgiving others or forgiving ourselves, it's not just some nice concept. It's about experiencing real freedom, real wholeness.
Absolutely. And it's a journey that's available to all of us.
So that brings us to the big question, the one that ties it all together.
Yeah.
How does this apply to the people listening right now?
Right? How does this apply to our listeners?
To their lives. Well, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? I think Philemon is like a mirror.
Okay.
It's not just about some ancient story. It's about us looking at our own lives.
Okay.
And asking some tough questions.
It sounds like this whole idea of forgiveness, it's not just some, abstract concept. It's something that has very real implications for how we live our lives, how we relate to other people, and even how we relate to ourselves.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think the challenge for all of us as we reflect on Philemon is to ask ourselves some tough questions. Where am I harboring bitterness? Who do I need to forgive? And maybe even more importantly, where do I need to offer forgiveness to myself?
So it's like Philemon is this mirror, forcing us to confront those things we might rather just avoid.
Right. But that's where the growth happens. That's where we find that freedom and wholeness.
It's not always easy, though.
No, it's not. It can be a really painful and messy process.
Mm-hmm.
But the rewards are immense. When we choose to forgive, we're not just letting go of the past. We're opening ourselves up to the possibility of a future filled with healing and reconciliation and even deeper relationships.
So it's not just about the other person.
Right.
It's about us, too.
It's about our own well-being.
Yeah, our own peace of mind.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it's not safe or healthy to re-engage with the person who hurt us.
Okay.
But we can still choose to forgive them in our hearts, to release that bitterness and resentment that's holding us captive.
And that might be the hardest part.
It can be.
Letting go of that need for an apology.
Yeah.
Or for the other person to even acknowledge what they did wrong.
Absolutely. It can be incredibly difficult, especially when we feel like we deserve an apology or some form of restitution. But true forgiveness is about choosing to let go, even when we don't feel like it. Yeah. Even when we feel like we've been wronged.
So it's an act of grace.
It is.
Not just towards the other person, but also towards ourselves.
And it's a reflection of the grace that God has shown us.
Okay.
We've all messed up. We've all fallen short.
We're human.
Yeah. And yet, God offers us forgiveness freely and unconditionally.
Wow.
And I think Philemon is a reminder that we're called to extend that same grace to others.
Yeah.
And ultimately to ourselves.
It's like a cycle.
It is.
The more we experience God's grace, the more we're able to offer it to other people.
Yeah.
And in turn, that grace flows back to us, creating this sense of freedom and wholeness.
Well, that's the power of forgiveness. It breaks those chains of bitterness and resentment.
Yeah.
And allows us to experience true peace and joy.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Phil and Ubain, the question I have for you listening is, where in your life do you need to offer forgiveness? Is there somebody you've been holding a grudge against? Is there a past hurt that you're still carrying? Or maybe most importantly, do you need to offer forgiveness to yourself? Because ultimately, forgiveness is the key to unlocking the fullness of life that God intends for us. It's a journey worth taking, even if it's difficult, even if it's messy, because the destination is freedom, healing, and a life lived in the fullness of grace.